The laughter reached her long before the door closed. Soft, polite, aristocratic, and cruel. "Poor Lady Rosalind," one young voice murmured in the corridor. 32 and still haunting Hartfield like an old portrait no one wishes to remove. A ripple of giggles followed. Rosalind Merrick stood very still inside the music room, her hand resting on the brass handle as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. For a moment she wondered if they knew she had heard. Perhaps they did. Perhaps it no longer mattered. After all, invisibility had its advantages. One learned to endure humiliation quietly when society had already decided one did not exist. The music room lay empty in the quiet wing of the Hartfield Manor, the tall windows casting late afternoon light across the polished oak floor. Dust floated through the air like drifting gold. Rosalind crossed the room slowly. Her steps made almost no sound. She had practiced that too. At 32, she had mastered the art of moving through rooms unnoticed, of holding coats while others danced, of arranging flowers while laughter echoed around her. Useful. The word clung to her like damp cloth. She placed her shawl over the back of a chair and approached the pianoforte near the window. Beyond the glass stretched the Hartfield Gardens, green lawns, trimmed hedges, and roses blooming beneath the July sun. Beautiful. Yet Rosalind saw none of it. Instead, she heard Victoria's voice again. "Aunt Rosalind is so useful." The remark had not been meant unkindly, which somehow made it worse. Her fingers pressed lightly against the keys. One note sounded. C-sharp. It trembled through the silent room before fading far too quickly. Rosalind closed her eyes. She would not cry. Not again. She had done that earlier beneath the oak grove where no one could see. Even so, her throat tightened. For just a moment she allowed herself a dangerous thought. Not to be useful, not to be kind, but to be wanted? To enter a room and feel someone look for her. The thought was reckless enough to make her laugh softly. Who would look for a woman the world had already dismissed? Then footsteps sounded in the corridor. Firm, measured, unmistakably masculine. Rosalind stiffened. Men rarely wandered into the quiet wing reserved for music and embroidery. The door opened before she could compose herself. Light from the hall cut across the floor, and in that doorway stood the most feared man in England, Alexander Granville, the Duke of Winterborn. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark riding clothes dusted with the road. The last rays of sunlight framed him like something carved from shadow and steel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rosalind's heart stuttered painfully in her chest. Everyone knew the Duke of Winterborn. He was spoken of in whispers across drawing rooms from London to Bath. A war hero, a widower, a man whose cold composure had turned away every ambitious mother in England. His wife had died 3 years ago. Since then, society claimed Winterborn's heart had been buried beside her. Yet now those sharp gray eyes were fixed directly on Rosalind, not past her, not through her, at her. The intensity of it made her breath catch. "My apologies," he said at last, his voice deep and unexpectedly gentle. "I did not realize the room was occupied." Rosalind quickly lowered her gaze, mortified that he might notice the lingering evidence of tears. "Your Grace," she murmured. She attempted a small curtsy, but the hem of her simple gown tangled around her shoe. The movement sent her stumbling forward. Before she could recover, he crossed the room in 2 swift strides. His gloved hand closed around her arm. Steady. Warm. The contact lasted barely a second, yet the air between them shifted in a way Rosalind could not explain. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The concern in his voice startled her far more than the touch. No one asked her such questions. "I am quite well," she replied quickly. A polite lie, the sort she had spoken 1,000 times. But he did not release her arm immediately. Instead, he studied her with unsettling attention, as though weighing the truth behind her words. "It does not appear so," he said quietly. Something fragile cracked inside her chest, because he had noticed. He had actually noticed. Rosalind forced a faint smile. "I assure you, Your Grace, there is nothing to trouble you." He hesitated. Then slowly he let go. Yet his gaze did not soften. For several seconds he simply stood there looking at her as though he were trying to remember something long forgotten. "Lady Rosalind Merrick," he said finally. Her breath caught. "You know my name?" "Of course." A faint crease appeared between his brows. "I cannot imagine why it has taken me so long to meet you." Rosalind did not know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her that way, as though her absence from the world had been an oversight. Outside, the wind stirred the garden trees. Sunlight flickered through the curtains, and for the first time in years, Rosalind Merrick felt something strange and terrifying awaken inside her. Hope, which made the next thought even more dangerous, because the Duke of Winterborn was still watching her, and he looked like a man who had just discovered something the world had hidden from him. Alexander Granville had not intended to stop. From the far end of the meadow, he had seen only a solitary figure seated beneath the old oaks, a woman in a modest gray gown, still as a statue against the summer grass. His first instinct had been to ride past without disturbing her. Solitude in country houses was sacred. Yet something in the way she wiped her eyes, quickly as though ashamed of the tears, had tightened something unfamiliar in his chest. Before he had quite decided why, he had drawn the reins of his stallion. Now he stood in the quiet music room of Hartfield Manor facing the woman who had unsettled him, Lady Rosalind Merrick. The name lingered in his mind as if he should have known it long ago. She stood near the pianoforte, her hands folded loosely before her. Nothing about her appearance should have drawn attention. Her gown was simple. Her hair, chestnut and softly coiled at the nape, held no fashionable ornament. She looked like a woman determined not to be seen, and yet Alexander could not seem to look anywhere else. It was not beauty alone that arrested him. It was the quiet gravity in her gaze, the calm endurance of someone who had been disappointed by life too many times to protest it anymore. He knew that expression. He had worn it himself since Catherine's death. "I should not have intruded," he said, taking a deliberate step backward. Distance felt necessary now. Rosalind inclined her head politely. "You are not intruding, Your Grace. The room belongs to the house, not to me." The remark was spoken without bitterness, but something about it struck him deeply. "Not to me." A curious statement for the sister of the house's master. "You are Lord Hartfield's sister," he said. "I am," she replied. "And yet you speak as though you are merely a guest here." A faint smile touched her lips. "Guests are usually noticed, Your Grace." Alexander studied her carefully. There was no flirtation in her tone, no coyness, only a quiet truth that made him strangely uncomfortable. He had attended countless gatherings in London where women worked tirelessly to capture his attention. Yet here stood a woman who seemed almost determined to avoid it. "Forgive my frankness," he said slowly, "but I do not recall seeing you in society." "You would not," she replied simply. "I stopped attending many years ago." The matter-of-factness of it unsettled him. Why would a woman of good family vanish from society so young? Before he could ask, voices drifted faintly through the corridor outside, servants moving through the hall, the distant rhythm of the household continuing its endless routine. Rosalind glanced toward the door. "I imagine my sister-in-law will soon be wondering where I have disappeared to." The choice of words amused him faintly. Disappeared, yes. That seemed exactly the sort of word society might attach to her. She moved toward the door with quiet grace. For a moment Alexander considered letting her go. That would be the sensible choice. He had come to Hartfield only to escape London's relentless matchmaking schemes. He had no interest in entanglements, especially not with women who possessed the dangerous ability to stir feelings he had long buried. But something in the set of her shoulders stopped him. A weary dignity, like a portrait hung too long in a shadowed gallery. "Lady Rosalind." She paused. When she turned back, the late sunlight caught in her eyes, revealing warm flecks of amber hidden within the brown. "Yes, Your Grace?" He hesitated. Alexander Granville was not a man prone to uncertainty, yet the words he was about to speak felt unexpectedly difficult. "I hope," he said slowly, "that whatever troubled you earlier has passed." The faintest flicker of surprise crossed her face. "You noticed?" "I did." Her gaze dropped to the floor. It was nothing of consequence. The answer sounded rehearsed. Alexander felt an odd surge of irritation. Not toward her, but toward whatever circumstances had taught her to dismiss her own feelings so quickly. He had seen soldiers return from war with less practiced restraint. "I suspect," he said quietly, "that if it mattered enough to make you cry, it was not nothing." Rosalind looked up again. For the first time, something unguarded flashed across her expression. Not anger, not embarrassment, something far more dangerous. Gratitude. It lasted only a moment before she composed herself. "You are very kind to say so, Your Grace." Kind. The word struck him harder than expected. Kindness was not a reputation he cultivated. Yet standing in that quiet room, watching a woman the world had apparently overlooked for years, Alexander Granville realized something unsettling. He wanted to see her smile again, and that he suspected was a mistake, because the Duke of Winterborn had spent 3 years ensuring he would never again care enough about anyone to make such mistakes. Yet as Rosalind Merrick slipped quietly out of the music room, Alexander remained where he stood, and for the first time since Catherine's death, he felt curiosity stirring where his heart had long been silent. Rosalind Merrick spent the remainder of the afternoon doing exactly what she had done every day for nearly a decade. She made herself useful. She supervised the kitchen for the evening supper. She mended a loose ribbon on Anne's gown. She sorted correspondence for her brother's household. Every task was performed with the same quiet precision that had made her indispensable at Hartfield Manor. Yet her mind refused to settle, because every time she paused, even for a moment, she remembered the way the Duke of Winterborn had looked at her. Not politely, not dismissively, but attentively. The memory unsettled her more than the cruel laughter she had overheard earlier. Cruelty was familiar, attention was not. By evening, the household gathered in the long dining room where tall windows overlooked the gardens. Candlelight flickered against polished silver and crystal glasses, casting soft reflections across the table. Rosalind took her usual seat halfway down the table. It was the safest position, close enough to assist when needed, far enough from the center of attention. Her sister-in-law, Lady Diana Hartfield, presided elegantly at the head of the table, her posture immaculate and her expression cool. To her right sat the evening's most distinguished guest, Alexander Granville, the Duke of Winterborn. Rosalind kept her gaze carefully lowered as servants poured wine and the conversation began. Victoria immediately claimed the Duke's attention. "Your Grace," she asked brightly, "is it true you attended the Queen's winter court last season?" Alexander answered politely, "Yes, Miss Hartfield." "And was it as grand as everyone says?" Charlotte added eagerly. "Quite grand," he replied. Rosalind focused on her plate. She had grown accustomed to such conversations. Young women adored tales of London society, and the Duke's presence was the greatest novelty Hartfield Manor had seen in years. She expected him to remain entirely occupied with her nieces, yet midway through the meal she felt it, that sensation again, someone watching her. Rosalind slowly lifted her gaze. Across the long table, Alexander Granville was looking directly at her, not in curiosity, not in politeness, in quiet assessment. Her heart stumbled. He did not look away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly as if asking a silent question. "Are you well now?" The understanding between them startled her. She gave the smallest nod she could manage. It felt scandalously intimate. A faint smile touched his mouth. Not the charming smile he offered the young ladies beside him. This one was different. Private, almost conspiratorial. Rosalind quickly lowered her eyes again, heat rising in her cheeks. Unfortunately, someone else noticed. Victoria followed the Duke's line of sight. Her brows lifted faintly when she saw where he was looking. "Oh, Aunt Rosalind," she said suddenly, her voice a shade too bright. "You always give the best advice." Rosalind glanced up cautiously. "Yes, dear?" "Tell me honestly," Victoria continued, smoothing the pale lavender sleeve of her gown. "Should I wear this color to the ball next week, or the blue one?" The question sounded innocent, but Rosalind recognized the trap immediately. Victoria already knew the answer she expected. Agreement. Rosalind had spent years offering gentle affirmations that allowed the younger girls to shine while she faded quietly into the background. Normally, she would have done so without hesitation, but tonight the Duke was still watching, and something strange had awakened in her chest. Something fragile, something bold. "I think," Rosalind said slowly, "that you should wear whichever color you prefer." Victoria blinked. That wasn't the question. Rosalind held her gaze calmly. "You look lovely in many colors, Victoria, but the one you enjoy most will always suit you best." Silence spread briefly across the table. It lasted only a few seconds, yet Rosalind felt the shift immediately. Victoria looked surprised. Charlotte looked thoughtful. Lady Diana's eyes narrowed slightly in quiet disapproval. And Alexander Granville? The Duke of Winterborn smiled, not politely, not faintly, but with unmistakable approval, as though Rosalind Merrick had just done something unexpectedly brave. Rosalind lowered her eyes again, her pulse racing. It had been such a small moment, a harmless remark. Yet something about it felt dangerously unfamiliar, because for the first time in years she had not made herself smaller, and across the candlelit table the most powerful man in the room had noticed. Alexander Granville had not meant to watch her. He had come to Hartfield Manor for a simple purpose: distance. Distance from London's drawing rooms. Distance from relentless matchmaking. Distance from memories that refused to loosen their grip on his conscience. Yet somehow, across the long dinner table surrounded by polite laughter and clinking crystal, his attention kept drifting to the quiet woman seated 6 chairs away, Lady Rosalind Merrick. She spoke little. She did not attempt to charm him. She did not flutter her eyelashes or press forward with clever remarks the way ambitious young ladies often did. Instead, she listened, she observed, and when she finally spoke, the entire table seemed to pause, as if surprised that she possessed a voice at all. Alexander had noticed the reaction immediately, the slight tightening of Lady Diana's lips, Victoria's startled blink. Rosalind had clearly disrupted an invisible rule, one that had long dictated her silence. It intrigued him more than it should have. Now, as servants cleared the final course and candles burned lower along the polished table, Alexander reached for his wineglass. The crystal stem pressed cold against his fingers. His gaze shifted once more toward Rosalind. She sat perfectly straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Composed, unassuming, and yet he sensed the effort it cost her. The restraint, the careful control. It reminded him painfully of someone else. For a fleeting moment, another face rose in his memory. Fair hair, gentle blue eyes, a laugh that once filled Winterborn Hall with warmth. Catherine, his wife, his failure. The memory struck like a blade sliding quietly between his ribs. Alexander's fingers tightened around the glass. He had loved Catherine. He had believed that love would protect her. Instead, he had buried her. 3 days after their son died in her arms, the physicians had spoken gently of fever and fate, but Alexander knew the truth. He had insisted they remain at Winterborn during her pregnancy. He had dismissed London's physicians. He had wanted an heir, and Catherine had paid the price. The weight of that knowledge had followed him every day since. It was why he avoided attachment, why he refused every smiling debutante presented before him, why the idea of caring for another woman felt not romantic, but dangerous. Your Grace? Lady Diana's voice cut through his thoughts like silk drawn across glass. He looked up. You seem distant. My apologies, Alexander replied smoothly. Travel fatigue. She nodded with polite acceptance. No one questioned the Duke. No one expected honesty. Conversation resumed. Yet Alexander found his gaze drawn again toward Rosalind. At that moment she lifted her head. Their eyes met across the candlelight. For a second she looked startled, like a deer caught in quiet sunlight. Then she lowered her gaze again, but not before a faint blush spread along her cheeks. Something warm stirred unexpectedly in Alexander's chest. Dangerous, very dangerous. He forced himself to look away. He had no right to notice such things. No right to feel curiosity, especially not toward a woman whose life appeared already complicated enough without a grieving Duke intruding upon it. And yet, when the ladies finally rose from the table and drifted toward the drawing room, Alexander found himself standing as well, almost without thinking. Rosalind lingered near the tall window at the far end of the room. She was adjusting her shawl, preparing, he suspected, to slip quietly away before anyone could request her assistance with music or tea. The habit of disappearing. Alexander crossed the room before he could reconsider. Lady Rosalind. She turned quickly. Her expression carried the faint surprise of someone unaccustomed to being addressed directly. Yes, Your Grace? For a moment, Alexander did not know what he meant to say, which annoyed him greatly. He was not a man easily disarmed. Yet something about her quiet presence had already unsettled his carefully ordered thoughts. Finally, he spoke the simplest truth available. Thank you. Her brow furrowed. For what? He hesitated, then said softly, for not disappearing tonight. The words escaped before he could reconsider them. Rosalind's lips parted slightly. Her eyes glimmered with something fragile, something hopeful, and in that instant Alexander Granville realized with sudden clarity that he had just done something profoundly reckless, because he had noticed her, and now he suspected he would not easily forget her again. For the next 3 days, Rosalind Merrick avoided the Duke of Winterborn with almost military precision. It was not difficult. Alexander rode each morning with her brother across the northern fields, returning only briefly for luncheon before retreating to the library. Yet the mere knowledge that he was somewhere within the vast walls of Hartfield Manor unsettled her in ways she could scarcely explain. Every corridor suddenly felt smaller. Every quiet moment felt charged with memory. Most dangerous of all were the words he had spoken before leaving the dining room. Thank you for not disappearing tonight. No one had ever thanked her for existing before. The thought followed her like a melody she could not silence. On the morning of the Hartfield summer ball, Lady Diana summoned the household ladies to the drawing room. Bolts of silk and lace had been arranged across the sofa, while the 3 nieces discussed gowns with excited animation. Victoria will wear the sky blue satin, Diana announced. It complements her complexion beautifully. Victoria smiled with satisfaction. Charlotte, the pale rose, Diana continued. Charlotte nodded happily. Then Diana glanced toward Rosalind. And you, Rosalind? Her tone was casual, almost absent-minded. Rosalind folded her hands quietly. The gray one, I believe. Victoria laughed, a light musical sound that nevertheless pierced the room. Aunt Rosalind always wears gray, she said, or brown. It is as though she wishes to disappear entirely. Charlotte shifted uneasily, perhaps recognizing the cruelty hidden beneath the playful tone. Perhaps, Charlotte offered gently, Aunt Rosalind might wear something brighter this year. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that would be quite a shock to the guests. Diana smiled faintly at the remark. The room felt suddenly very small. Rosalind forced a polite smile. I should hate to outshine you all, my dears. Victoria laughed again, as if that could happen. The words were spoken lightly, but the truth inside them struck with quiet precision. Rosalind rose slowly. I believe I should see to the flower arrangements in the ballroom. No one stopped her. No one asked if she was well. They were already discussing ribbons and gloves again as she slipped quietly from the room. This time she did not walk to the gardens. Instead, she went directly to her chamber. The moment the door closed behind her, the fragile composure she had maintained all morning began to fracture. She sat on the edge of her bed. Her reflection stared back from the small mirror above the dressing table. Brown hair pinned neatly, plain gray gown, eyes dulled by years of careful restraint. Invisible, the word echoed through her thoughts. Perhaps Victoria had not meant to wound her. But the truth remained the same. She'd spent years perfecting invisibility. It had been safer that way, safer than hoping. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Rosalind stiffened. Lady Rosalind. The voice outside the door was unmistakable. Alexander. Her breath caught. Not now. Not when her defenses had already begun to crumble. I am quite well, Your Grace, she said quickly through the door. A pause followed. Then his voice came again. Lower. Firm. No, you are not. The quiet certainty of it made her chest tighten painfully. Another pause. May I come in? Rosalind stared at the door. Every sensible instinct urged her to refuse, to preserve the careful distance that had protected her heart for years. But exhaustion loosened her restraint. Before she could stop herself, she crossed the room and opened the door slightly. Alexander stood in the corridor wearing his dark riding coat. Wind had loosened strands of his dark hair, but it was his expression that startled her most. Concern, and something dangerously close to anger. His gaze swept across her face, immediately noticing the tears she had failed to hide. His jaw tightened. Who made you cry? The question was not gentle. It sounded like a demand. Rosalind shook her head. No one. His expression did not change. Rosalind. Hearing her name spoken without title sent a strange shiver down her spine. She lowered her eyes. My niece said something foolish, she whispered. It is of no importance. What did she say? Rosalind hesitated. Then, because she was tired of pretending, she answered honestly. She said I am invisible. Her voice trembled despite her efforts. And she is correct, I have always been. She forced a faint smile. For a moment I believed perhaps that was not entirely true. Her gaze lifted briefly to meet his. But that was only a foolish misunderstanding. Alexander went very still. Then he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and closed the door behind him. You are mistaken, he said quietly. His voice had changed. Lower. Rougher. I see you, Rosalind Merrick. The word struck her like a sudden storm. I see you so clearly it hurts to look. And the heart she had taught herself never to hope again began to break open in a way she had not thought possible. Alexander Granville should never have stepped inside that room. The moment the door closed behind him, he knew it. Every instinct sharpened by years of discipline warned him to leave immediately. But the sight of her standing there, eyes red, shoulders drawn inward as if apologizing for her own sorrow, had shattered something inside him. Rosalind Merrick had spent years believing herself invisible, and somehow that truth enraged him. I see you, he repeated quietly. She stared at him as though the words were too heavy to hold. You see a mistake, she whispered. No. His voice cut through the room with quiet certainty. I see the woman who keeps this household from falling into chaos while others take the credit. He took a slow step closer. I see the aunt who comforts frightened children at night. Another step. I see the woman who speaks gently so others may feel important. Rosalind's breath trembled. And I see the woman who believes none of those things matter because no one has told her they do. She looked away quickly. Please, she said softly, do not be kind to me. The plea startled him. Why? Because I would not know how to survive it if it were taken away. The honesty of the confession struck him like a blow. Alexander lifted his hand slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. When she did not, his fingertips brushed lightly against her cheek. Her skin was warm, Soft. Rosalind closed her eyes as if the contact burned. You deserve kindness, he said hoarsely. You deserve to be seen. Her lips parted slightly. And you deserve more than this house will ever offer you. Her eyes opened again, searching his face. You speak as though you know me. I know enough. He stepped back suddenly. The closeness had become dangerous. Too intimate. Too familiar. Memories he had buried for 3 years began stirring like restless ghosts. You do not understand, he said, his voice hardening. You must not mistake my attention for something it cannot be. Rosalind frowned slightly. What do you mean? Alexander turned toward the window. Outside, the garden stretched peacefully beneath the late afternoon sun. The world looked calm, ordered, nothing like the storm twisting inside his chest. There is a reason, he said quietly, that I refuse every woman who attempts to capture my interest. Silence hung between them. Finally, he spoke the truth he rarely allowed himself to voice.
My wife died.
Rosalind's expression softened. I know. You know the story, he said bitterly. You do not know the truth. He forced the words out. Catherine died of fever after giving birth. Rosalind's hand lifted instinctively to her mouth. Our son did not survive either. The memory tightened around his ribs like iron. I insisted we remain at Winterborn during her pregnancy, he continued. I wanted an heir. I believed London's physicians unnecessary. His voice dropped. And because of that decision, she died. The confession echoed through the room like a verdict. I killed her. Rosalind shook her head immediately. No. Yes. His tone was merciless. I placed ambition above caution. The words tasted like ash. I will not make that mistake again. He turned to face her fully. If I allowed myself to care for another woman and she suffered because of me. He stopped. The thought itself felt unbearable. Rosalind crossed the small distance between them. Slowly, carefully, her hands rested gently against his back. The touch was light, yet it steadied something wild inside him. You did not kill her, she said softly. It was tragedy. He closed his eyes briefly. No, it was life. Her voice held quiet strength. And life is not something we can control. Alexander turned toward her. She was standing very close now. Close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose. Close enough that her breath brushed his collar. Do not say such things, he murmured. Why? Because if I begin believing them, his voice faltered, I might begin believing I deserve to live again. Rosalind looked at him with heartbreaking tenderness. Perhaps you do. For one reckless moment, Alexander Granville allowed himself to hope she might be right, and that realization terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. Alexander should have left, after his confession, after the moment Rosalind's hands had rested gently against his back, steadying him as though the weight he carried could be shared. He should have stepped away and restored the careful distance that had protected them both. Instead, he remained standing before her, breathing the same quiet air, feeling the fragile warmth of her presence far too clearly. You should not look at me that way, he said softly. Rosalind tilted her head slightly. And how do I look at you? Like a man worth saving. Her lips curved faintly. Perhaps I am simply looking at a man worth understanding. The answer struck him harder than any accusation. For 3 years, society had treated him with careful reverence. No one questioned him. No one challenged his guilt. No one dared contradict the Duke who blamed himself for his wife's death. Yet Rosalind Merrick had done so without hesitation, without fear. Alexander exhaled slowly. You are braver than you realize. Perhaps, she said quietly. I have simply spent too long being afraid. Their eyes held. The silence between them deepened until it felt almost sacred. Then distant voices echoed in the corridor. Victoria and Charlotte, excitedly discussing the evening's ball. Reality returned like cold air through an open window. Alexander stepped back immediately. The careful mask of composure settled once more over his features. He was the Duke of Winterborn again, controlled, impenetrable. But before leaving, he reached for Rosalind's hand. The gesture was quick, almost reckless. Wear red tonight. She blinked in surprise. Red? Yes. I own nothing red. His mouth curved slightly. You do now. Her confusion deepened. What do you mean? It will arrive before the ball. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles lightly. The contact sent a shiver through both of them. Tonight, he murmured. Do not disappear. And then he was gone. The dress arrived 2 hours before the ball. Crimson silk, deep and radiant, trimmed with delicate black lace. Rosalind stared at it in stunned silence as the maid helped fasten the final clasp. She had never worn anything so bold. So alive. When she descended the grand staircase of Hartfield Manor, the ballroom fell abruptly silent. Music faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every gaze turned. Lady Diana gasped. Victoria's smile froze in disbelief. And standing at the foot of the staircase, Alexander Granville looked up. For a moment he said nothing. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Not the guarded smile of a duke, but the quiet, awed smile of a man seeing something precious. He stepped forward and offered his arm. Lady Rosalind. Her heart pounded as she placed her hand against his sleeve. Together they entered the ballroom. Whispers followed them like wind through silk. The invisible spinster, on the arm of England's most unattainable duke. Alexander led her directly to the center of the dance floor as the orchestra resumed its waltz. His hand rested firmly at her waist. The other held hers gently. They are all staring, she whispered. Let them, he replied calmly. They began to dance. Perfectly. Effortlessly. Rosalind barely noticed the steps. All she could feel was the steady warmth of his hand guiding her, the certainty of his gaze never leaving her face. Halfway through the waltz, Alexander suddenly stopped. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. He released her hand. Then, before the entire assembly of Hartfield's guests, the Duke of Winterborn knelt. A stunned silence fell beneath the glittering chandeliers. Alexander, she breathed. His voice carried clearly through the room. Rosalind Merrick. He opened a small velvet box. An emerald ring flashed beneath the candlelight. You taught me something I believed impossible. She stared down at him, heart racing. You reminded me that life does not end with grief. He held her gaze steadily, and if you are willing to accept a man still haunted by his past, I will spend the rest of my days ensuring you are never invisible again. The room held its breath. Marry me. Tears blurred Rosalind's vision. For 32 years she had been overlooked, forgotten, dismissed, and now the most powerful man in the room was offering her his future before all of society. Her answer came without hesitation. Yes. Her voice rang clear. Yes, Your Grace. Alexander slid the emerald ring onto her finger and rose. Then, ignoring the shocked whispers surrounding them, he drew her into his arms and kissed her. Applause erupted around the ballroom, but Rosalind barely heard it. For the first time in her life, the world was finally seeing her. And this time, she did not intend to disappear.